My fiancé said she was going on a girls' trip, so I tracked the location and found her sharing a room with her ex. I'm 29, and 2 weeks ago I discovered that my fiancé of 3 years had been lying about a weekend girls' trip to actually meet up with her ex-boyfriend at a romantic resort. What she didn't know was that I'd been suspicious enough to check our shared location services, and what I found there led me to make a decision that changed everything between us. My name is Connor, and this is about how one weekend of lies revealed that the woman I was planning to marry had never really let go of her past. Let me start by giving you some context about my relationship with Vanessa, because understanding our history makes what happened so much more devastating. We met 4 years ago through mutual friends at a barbecue, and I was immediately drawn to her confidence and humor. She was a marketing coordinator at a tech startup. I was working as a project manager for a construction company, and we just clicked in a way that felt natural and easy from the very beginning. Vanessa had been single for about 8 months when we met, having recently ended what she described as a complicated 3-year relationship with someone named Blake. She didn't talk about it much in the early days of our relationship, just mentioning that they'd broken up because they wanted different things and the timing hadn't been right. I appreciated that she didn't spend hours analyzing her past relationship or comparing me to her ex, which had been an issue with other women I dated before. Our relationship progressed steadily and healthily over the next few years. We moved in together after dating for a year, adopted a rescue dog named Murphy 6 months later, and started talking seriously about marriage by our 2nd anniversary. I proposed last December on Christmas Eve in front of both our families, and Vanessa seemed genuinely thrilled about planning our wedding for next fall. We'd already booked a venue, hired a photographer, and started looking at potential honeymoon destinations in Europe. But over the past few months, I'd started noticing some subtle changes in Vanessa's behavior that made me increasingly uneasy. She'd become more protective of her phone, taking it with her everywhere and positioning it face down when we were together. She'd started mentioning old college friends more frequently, people she hadn't talked about in years, and making vague references to wanting to reconnect with people from her past before we got married and settled down completely. The biggest red flag was how she'd react when I asked casual questions about her day or her plans. She'd get defensive quickly, accusing me of being controlling or not trusting her, even when I was just making normal conversation about her work or social activities. When I pointed out that her responses seemed disproportionate to my innocent questions, she'd apologize and say she was stressed about wedding planning and work deadlines. But the pattern kept repeating itself week after week. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa announced that she wanted to take a weekend girls' trip to celebrate her upcoming bachelorette party with her college roommate Lindsay and her sister Jenna. She said they'd found a great deal on a spa resort about 3 hours away and wanted to have a relaxing weekend before the craziness of wedding planning really ramped up in the spring. It sounded perfectly reasonable, and I was actually happy that she was taking time to enjoy herself and bond with the important women in her life before our wedding. But something about the way she presented the trip felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced what she was going to say to me beforehand. She had immediate answers to all my questions about dates, locations, and logistics in a way that seemed too prepared and polished. When I mentioned that the resort sounded nice and maybe we could go there together sometime for a romantic weekend, she quickly said it was really more of a women's wellness place and probably wouldn't be my style since it focused on yoga and meditation. The night before she left, I was helping her pack and noticed she was bringing clothes that seemed more appropriate for romantic dinners than spa treatments. A little black dress I'd never seen before, heels, and lingerie that looked brand new. When I commented on the dressy clothes, she laughed and said Lindsay had insisted they dress up for nice dinners at the resort restaurant, and that she wanted to feel glamorous and special during their girls' weekend. She left early Saturday morning, kissing me goodbye and promising to send pictures throughout the weekend so I could see how much fun they were having. For the first few hours after she left, I didn't think much about the trip. I spent the day doing some work around the house, walking Murphy, and catching up on a TV series Vanessa didn't enjoy. It was actually nice to have some quiet alone time to relax and recharge. But by Saturday evening, I realized I hadn't heard from her at all since she'd left that morning. No texts, no photos of spa treatments or scenic views, no check-in calls. That was highly unusual for Vanessa, who normally communicated constantly when we were apart, sending me pictures of her meals and updates about everything she was doing. I sent her a casual text asking how the spa was and if she was having fun, but didn't get any response. Sunday morning arrived, and I still hadn't heard anything from Vanessa. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail without ringing. By Sunday afternoon, I was genuinely worried that something had happened to her or that there had been some kind of emergency at the resort. That's when I remembered that we'd shared our locations with each other about a year ago for safety reasons when I was traveling for work, and I decided to check where she was to make sure she was okay. What I found on the location app changed everything I thought I knew about my fiancé. According to the shared location data, Vanessa wasn't at a spa resort 3 hours north of our city. She was at something called the Grandview Mountain Lodge, a place I'd never heard of that was located about 2 hours in the opposite direction from where she'd told me she was going. I stared at my phone screen for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing and come up with innocent explanations. Why would she lie about where she was going? And why was she at a completely different location than what she described to me? I spent the next hour researching the Grandview Mountain Lodge online, and everything I found made my stomach sink deeper into dread. This wasn't a spa or wellness center focused on relaxation and female bonding. It was an upscale resort that specialized exclusively in romantic weekends for couples, complete with packages for couples massages, private dining experiences, and luxury suites with fireplaces and jacuzzis. Their website emphasized privacy and intimacy, with photos of couples sharing wine by candlelight and walking hand-in-hand through scenic mountain trails. I tried desperately to think of innocent explanations for why Vanessa would be there instead of where she'd told me she was going. Maybe Lindsay had surprised her with a last-minute change of plans and upgraded their accommodations? Maybe they'd found a better deal at this resort and Vanessa hadn't had a chance to update me about the location change? But none of those explanations felt convincing, especially given her complete lack of communication throughout the entire weekend, which was completely unlike her normal behavior. By Sunday evening, I'd made a decision that I'm still not entirely sure was the right one, but felt necessary at the time. I was going to drive to the Grandview Mountain Lodge and find out what was really happening. I know that sounds like the behavior of a paranoid, controlling partner, and maybe it was, but I was desperate for answers and couldn't stand not knowing the truth about what my fiancé was actually doing while lying to me about her whereabouts. The drive to the resort took about 2.5 hours through winding mountain roads, and I spent the entire time alternating between hope that there was an innocent explanation and increasing dread that I was about to discover something that would fundamentally destroy our relationship. I kept checking her location periodically on my phone, and she was still showing as being at the resort. Whatever was happening there, she wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. I arrived at the Grandview Mountain Lodge around 9 o'clock Sunday night. The place was exactly as romantic and intimate as the website had suggested, with soft lighting throughout the grounds, breathtaking mountain views, and couples walking around the beautifully landscaped property holding hands and looking completely absorbed in each other. I felt completely out of place and increasingly certain that I was about to learn something I really didn't want to know. I parked in the guest lot and sat in my car for several minutes, trying to decide what to do next. I couldn't exactly march into the lobby and demand to know what room my fiancé was staying in or who she was with. But I also couldn't drive 3 hours back home without getting some kind of answer about why Vanessa had lied to me about where she was spending the weekend and why she was at a romantic couples resort instead of a spa with her female friends. That's when I saw them walking across the resort's main courtyard, and my world completely fell apart. Vanessa was strolling casually with a man I immediately recognized from old photos she'd shown me years ago when we first started dating. Blake, her ex-boyfriend who she'd supposedly had no contact with since before we met. They were walking close together, her arm linked through his in an intimate way, both of them laughing about something and looking completely comfortable and natural together. She was wearing the black dress I'd seen her pack, and they looked exactly like what they obviously were, a couple enjoying a romantic weekend getaway together. I sat in my car watching them for probably 10 minutes, feeling like I was having some kind of surreal out-of-body experience. This couldn't be real. The woman I was planning to marry in 8 months couldn't be at a romantic resort with her ex-boyfriend while lying to me about being on a girls' trip with her sister and college roommate. But there they were, walking back toward the main lodge building, stopping to kiss tenderly under one of the decorative lampposts like lovers who belonged together. I finally got out of my car and followed them at a distance, staying in the shadows and trying to process what I was witnessing while figuring out what to do next. They went into the resort's main restaurant, where I could see them through the large windows being seated at an intimate table for two by the stone fireplace. The hostess was treating them like regulars, which made me wonder if this wasn't their first visit to this place together. I stood outside in the cold mountain air, watching them through the restaurant windows and feeling like my entire world was collapsing around me. They ordered wine and were clearly having a romantic dinner, leaning across the table toward each other, holding hands, and engaging in the kind of deep conversation that lovers have when they're completely absorbed in each other. Vanessa was animated and happy in a way I hadn't seen her in months, laughing at something Blake said and touching his arm affectionately. Part of me wanted to march in there and confront them immediately, to make a scene that would force them to acknowledge what they were doing and explain themselves. But another part of me was terrified of what that conversation would reveal about my relationship and my future. Maybe it was better to pretend I'd never seen this, to go home and wait for Vanessa to come back with her lies about the spa weekend, to live in denial rather than face the truth that my fiancé was having an affair. But I knew I couldn't do that. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, and I couldn't marry someone who was capable of this level of deception and betrayal. Whatever this meant for our relationship, I needed to know the truth about what was happening between Vanessa and Blake. I decided to wait until they finished dinner and see where they went next, hoping against hope that maybe they had separate rooms and this was just some kind of innocent dinner between old friends who happened to be staying at the same resort. I knew that explanation didn't make sense given all the lies Vanessa had told me, but I was still clinging to any possibility that this situation wasn't as devastating as it appeared. When they left the restaurant around 11, my worst fears were confirmed. They walked together to the elevator bank, Blake's arm around Vanessa's waist, and went upstairs together. I waited in the lobby for another 30 minutes, pretending to read a magazine while watching for any sign that Vanessa might come back down, that they might have separate accommodations. But she never reappeared, and eventually the lobby emptied out as other guests retired for the evening. I drove home that night in a state of shock, knowing that my engagement was over even though I hadn't confronted Vanessa yet. There was no innocent explanation for what I'd witnessed. My fiancée was having some kind of romantic affair with her ex-boyfriend, and she constructed an elaborate lie to cover it up. The level of deception required to pull this off was staggering, and it made me realize I didn't really know the person I'd been planning to spend my life with. The 3-hour drive back to our apartment gave me time to think about how I wanted to handle the confrontation. I could wait for her to come home Monday and give her a chance to dig herself deeper into her lies before revealing what I knew. I could call her immediately and confront her over the phone while she was still with Blake. Or I could wait and see what story she came home with, then decide how to proceed based on how elaborate her deception was. By the time I got home, I decided to let her return with whatever lies she prepared and give her one final opportunity to tell me the truth voluntarily before revealing what I knew. It seemed like the fairest approach, and it would help me understand just how committed she was to deceiving me about this situation. I spent Monday morning in a daze, trying to go through the motions of a normal day while knowing that my life was about to change completely. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed or rationalized away over the past few months. Vanessa's secretiveness about her phone, her defensiveness when I asked innocent questions, her mentions of wanting to reconnect with old friends before our wedding. Had she been planning this affair for months? Or was it a recent development? How long had she been in contact with Blake? And what had prompted them to reconnect? The questions were driving me crazy, but I knew I'd have answers soon enough. Vanessa came home Monday afternoon around 3, full of energy and stories about her wonderful spa weekend. She talked enthusiastically about the massage treatments she'd supposedly received, the healthy meals she'd eaten with Lindsay and Jenna, and how relaxed and refreshed she felt after spending time bonding with the important women in her life. She even showed me some photos on her phone of beautiful mountain scenery, though I noticed she was very careful not to show me any pictures that included other people. I sat there listening to her elaborate lies, feeling sick to my stomach but not ready to confront her yet. I needed time to organize my thoughts about how I wanted to handle this conversation and what I wanted to say to her. Part of me was still hoping there might be some explanation I hadn't considered, though I knew that was just desperate denial on my part. "How was your weekend?" she asked, sitting down next to me on the couch and taking my hand in hers. "Did you miss me?" I felt so bad being out of touch, but the spa had this whole digital detox policy where they encouraged guests to disconnect from technology. The lie came so naturally to her, so smoothly and convincingly, that it made me realize this level of deception wasn't new for Vanessa. She clearly had practiced lying to me about things, and I started wondering what else she might have been dishonest about throughout our relationship. I told her I'd had a quiet weekend and had missed her, which was technically true even though it felt like a betrayal given what I now knew about how she'd actually spent her time. She seemed completely relaxed and happy, genuinely comfortable with her deception, which somehow made the whole situation feel worse. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake she was struggling with guilt about. This was calculated dishonesty that she was prepared to maintain indefinitely. That evening, while Vanessa was in the shower, I made a decision about how I wanted to handle the confrontation. I was going to give her one more opportunity to tell me the truth voluntarily before revealing what I knew. It seemed like the fairest approach, and it would help me understand just how deep her dishonesty went and whether she was capable of coming clean when directly asked. When she came out of the bathroom in her robe, looking relaxed and content, I asked her casually if anything interesting had happened during the weekend, if she'd run into anyone she knew or had any unexpected experiences. She said no, it had been exactly what she'd expected, just a relaxing weekend with the girls focused on spa treatments and sister bonding. I asked if she'd taken any photos with Lindsay and Jenna, saying I'd love to see pictures of them all together since it had been a while since I'd seen her sister. She said they'd been so focused on relaxing and being present in the moment that they hadn't really taken any group photos, but maybe next time they'd remember to document their time together better. Every single answer was a lie delivered with complete confidence and conviction. Vanessa wasn't just hiding her weekend with Blake. She was actively constructing an alternative reality and presenting it to me as the truth. The level of premeditation and commitment to deception was staggering, and it made me realize that I didn't really know the person I was planning to marry. I told Vanessa I was tired and went to bed early, but I spent most of the night lying awake thinking about our entire relationship and questioning everything I thought I knew about her. How long had she been lying to me about things? Was Blake the only secret she was keeping? Or were there other deceptions I hadn't discovered yet? Had she ever really stopped having feelings for him? Or had she been maintaining some kind of connection with him throughout our entire relationship while pretending to be committed to building a future with me? The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer to have the conversation that would determine the future of our relationship. I confronted Vanessa on Tuesday evening when she got home from work. I'd spent the entire day preparing what I wanted to say, and I decided to be direct and honest rather than trying to trap her in more lies or play games with the information I had. "We need to talk," I said as soon as she walked in the door, before she could start telling me about her day or settling into our usual evening routine. "I know you weren't at a spa resort this weekend. I know you were at the Grandview Mountain Lodge with Blake." The look on her face told me everything I needed to know about the truth of the situation. Pure panic flashed across her features, followed immediately by a desperate attempt to figure out how much I actually knew and how I discovered her deception. She tried to deny it at first, asking what I was talking about and why I would think such a terrible thing about her, but her voice was shaking and she couldn't meet my eyes. When I told her I'd driven to the resort and seen them together, seen them having dinner and kissing and going upstairs together, her entire demeanor changed. The pretense dropped completely, and she broke down crying, admitting that she'd been in contact with Blake for the past few months. According to her version of events, Blake had reached out to her through social media around the time we got engaged, supposedly to congratulate her on our engagement and apologize for how their relationship had ended years ago. They'd started texting occasionally, just as friends catching up on each other's lives, and she hadn't told me because she knew I'd be uncomfortable with her having any contact with her ex-boyfriend. "It was supposed to be closure," she said through her tears, mascara running down her cheeks. "I wanted to make peace with my past before we got married and started our new life together." Blake said he had some things he'd always wanted to say to me, things he'd regretted not saying when we broke up, and I thought if we could have one honest conversation, I could finally put that relationship behind me completely. I asked her why she'd needed to lie about where she was going and why they'd required an entire romantic weekend at a couple's resort to have this conversation. She claimed that Blake had suggested meeting somewhere neutral and private where they could talk without interruptions or distractions, and that the weekend format had been his idea because they had so much to discuss about their past relationship. She said she'd lied to me about the location and the nature of the trip because she knew how it would look and didn't want me to worry about something that was really just about getting closure and moving forward. But when I pressed her for more details about their conversations and their weekend together, her story started falling apart completely. She couldn't explain why they'd been holding hands and kissing if this was supposedly just about platonic closure. She couldn't justify why she'd brought romantic clothes and new lingerie, or why they'd shared intimate dinners and obviously spent the night together if this was supposed to be a friendly goodbye conversation. Finally, after 20 minutes of increasingly desperate explanations that made no sense, she admitted the real truth. She'd been having serious doubts about our engagement and had reached out to Blake herself to see if there were still romantic feelings between them. The weekend had been a way to explore those feelings and figure out what she really wanted before committing to marrying me and spending the rest of her life in what she was starting to see as the wrong relationship. "I needed to know for sure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to know if what Blake and I had was really over, or if I was settling for something safe and comfortable with you instead of fighting for something passionate and intense with him." That word, settling, hit me like a physical blow to the chest. After 3 years together, after planning a wedding and a future and talking about children and growing old together, she saw our relationship as settling for something safe rather than pursuing what she actually wanted. I asked her what she decided after her weekend of testing her feelings with Blake. She said she'd realized that what we had was more real and sustainable than the intense but ultimately unstable relationship she'd had with him. She claimed she'd chosen me and our future together, and that the weekend had actually strengthened her commitment to our engagement by proving that her feelings for Blake were based on nostalgia rather than genuine compatibility. But I was done listening to her justifications and explanations and attempts to minimize what she'd done. The fact that she'd needed to have an affair to decide whether she wanted to marry me told me everything I needed to know about how she really felt about our relationship and about me as a partner. I told her the engagement was off and that I wanted her to move out of our apartment as soon as possible. I said I'd give her a week to find somewhere else to live, but that I couldn't continue sharing a home with someone who'd betrayed me so completely. The week that followed was a blur of logistics and emotional devastation. Vanessa alternated between begging me to reconsider and getting angry that I was throwing away our relationship over what she called one mistake. She seemed genuinely shocked that I wasn't willing to work through this situation, as if having an affair to test her feelings was just a minor relationship hiccup that we should be able to overcome with some communication and couples therapy. People make mistakes when they're scared about big life decisions, she kept saying. This doesn't have to end everything between us. We can get through this if you're willing to forgive me and work on rebuilding trust. But I couldn't get past the fundamental issue. She'd needed to cheat on me to figure out if she wanted to marry me. Even if she'd ultimately decided she wanted to be with me instead of Blake, the fact that our relationship had been just one option she was considering while she explored alternatives was devastating and unforgivable. I deserved to be with someone who chose me enthusiastically and without reservation, not someone who settled for me after testing other possibilities and finding them wanting. Vanessa moved in with her sister temporarily while looking for her own apartment. The logistics of separating our lives after 3 years together were complicated and emotionally exhausting. We had to figure out who would keep Murphy, how to handle the deposits we'd already paid for wedding vendors, what to do about the engagement ring, and how to divide our shared possessions and mutual friends. The hardest part was telling our families and friends what had happened. My parents were supportive but shocked, since they'd really liked Vanessa and had been looking forward to welcoming her into our family officially. Vanessa's family was more complicated. Her sister Jenna was furious with her for destroying our relationship, while her parents seemed to think I was overreacting and should have been willing to work through the situation with counseling. It's been 2 months since I ended our engagement, and while I still have moments of sadness and doubt, I know I made the right decision. I've learned that I deserve a partner who chooses me clearly and consistently, not someone who needs to test other options to confirm their feelings. Trust, once broken this completely, can never be fully repaired, and I refuse to spend my life wondering what my partner is really thinking or whether they're truly committed to our relationship. I'm focusing on rebuilding my life and figuring out what I want in a future relationship. I know now that I want someone who communicates openly about their doubts and concerns rather than lying and sneaking around. Most importantly, I want a partner who sees our relationship as their first choice, not their safest option after exploring more exciting alternatives. What do you think? Was I right to end the engagement immediately, or should I have been willing to work through her betrayal? Sometimes I wonder if I gave up too easily, but then I remember that she needed to have an affair to decide if she wanted to marry me, and I know I made the right choice.